Good morning. Thank you all for coming at short notice. I think the shortest notice event we've ever had in the history of Policy Exchange, but we're always glad to be at the heart of national debate and grateful to the Foreign Secretary for coming here today and following on from his first keynote speech as Foreign Secretary in the UK some months ago. He's very kindly agreed to answer questions, and he'll be chairing the question session himself. The only house rule, as always, is no question too outrageous. You just have to state your name and organisation first. It's my great pleasure to welcome him here today. But before calling upon him, just to ask President of the Board of Trade, Liam Fox MP, just to say a few words and then to throw it open to our guest speaker. Thank you, Liam.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. The difference between electing a leader of the opposition and electing a prime minister is that the prime minister has to be ready from the very first minute. In their hands will sit the security and defence of our country. They will have to lead at home and abroad. And of course, they will have to win an election for us. And for that, they have to connect with our voters. And the one thing that I've seen throughout this campaign is how Jeremy has connected with our voters. As someone who came from an armed forces family, how easily he was able to connect during Armed Forces Day. As someone who is an entrepreneur, how easily he's been connecting with every small business, every corner shop owner, every white van man and woman who needs to be regarding the Tory party as the default party when we get to an election. And as our Foreign Secretary, already on top of all the major issues in our world today. But of course, we can't win until we carry out one task, and that is we have to deliver Brexit for the British people. A Brexit that has to be thought about and meticulously planned for. And if one thing I've learned from my time working with Jeremy in Cabinet, it is how meticulously planned he is for everything and always ready to deliver. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who will deliver for Britain, Jeremy Hunt. Thank you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Dean, for having me here. Since the start of this campaign, I've actually travelled more than 3,000 miles across the UK, up and down the country, meeting members, small businesses, actually having a lot of fun, eating a lot of food. I've had fish and chips in Peterhead, a Balti in Birmingham, cream tea in Devon. I'll try Cornwall next time, Sarah, with the jam and cream reversed. But most of all, as Liam alluded to, I have enjoyed talking to and debating with members of the public about the changes I want to make as Prime Minister. Now, as an entrepreneur, that's a new line for this morning, I want to fire up our economy, cut corporation tax and scrap business rates for thousands of high street companies up and down the country. As a reformer, I want our next social mission to be to abolish illiteracy and ensure that every young person has the skills they need to get a well-paid job. And as the son of a naval officer, as Liam mentioned, I want us to walk tall in the world with a decisive increase in defence spending so that Britain continues to defend the values that we believe in. But before we make any of those changes, we have to do one thing above all else. We must leave the European Union. Uncertainty is bad for business, bad for politics, and bad for our country. As one of the oldest democracies in the world, we must show the world that in this country it is the people and not the politicians who are the boss. And as your Prime Minister, I will. But belief alone won't cut it. Rhetoric isn't enough. This is about hard graft, focus, and attention to detail, deal or no deal. That means every eventuality, every law or statutory instrument, every industry, every part of the UK. One slip and we lose our leverage, our security, and possibly even Brexit itself. So I will make us ready. Throughout the campaign, I've made it clear that my preference is for us to leave with a better deal, one that addresses the problems with the existing deal and specifically the backstop, ensures we have a fully independent trade policy, and allows us to design our own immigration system. I know that with my experience of business and government, I'm the best placed candidate to get that better deal. But I also know that renegotiation will not be easy, but it won't be impossible either. And with the parliamentary arithmetic that we face, securing a deal that can pass through Parliament remains the quickest and safest way to deliver Brexit. But what if the European Union refuses to budge? We need a comprehensive no-deal plan, because Brexit is about more than slogans, more than belief, more than positive thinking. You can't leave the European Union on a wing and a prayer. You need a plan. And today I'm setting out my 10-point plan. Firstly, on day one of my premiership, I will order an immediate ramping up of no-deal preparations. All government departments will be expected to act on the basis that we are leaving without a deal on October the 31st. All August leave will be cancelled unless I have a signed letter from the relevant permanent secretary saying that all preparations in his or her department are on time and on track. Secondly, a no-deal cabinet task force with similar powers to COBRA will be set up and chaired by me, and it will have three objectives. Firstly, to follow up any areas where government preparations are insufficient. Secondly, to agree and publish financial support for industries affected by tariff changes. Thirdly, to approve infrastructure changes, including those that may not be completed by the 31st of October, such as a dramatic expansion of container capacity, changes which are nonetheless very important and need to be started immediately. Thirdly, a new political negotiating team will be convened with members of the ERG, the DUP, members of the One Nation Group, and Welsh and Scottish Conservatives. It will be led by the Brexit Secretary and supported at an official level by Crawford Falconer. He will be joined by top experts from around the world, tasked with producing an alternative exit deal based on the alternative arrangements proposals that can both command a majority in the House of Commons and address seriously and forensically legitimate EU and Irish concerns about the Irish border and the integrity of the single market. This plan will be published by the end of August. In order to avoid a take-it-or-leave-it approach, which would be fatal to negotiations, I and the Brexit Secretary will engage with European leaders and the European Commission during July and August to do our very best to come to an agreed way forward. I'll also establish, fifthly, a national logistics committee led by the Department of Transport to produce a plan to keep goods flowing in and out of the UK in the event of no deal. This will include an assessment of any emergency powers required to ensure ports and airports will work in a coordinated way nationally. Number 6, the Treasury will start preparations on a no-deal Brexit budget to be delivered the first week Parliament is back in September. This will include my existing policies of cutting corporation tax to 12.5%, increasing the annual investment allowance to £5 million, and taking 90% of high street businesses out of rates, which I will introduce in any circumstance. Number 7, HMT will also produce a no-deal relief programme. This will include a £6 billion fund for the fishing and farming sectors who export to Europe to ease transition out of the European Union whilst honouring our international obligations. It will also consider what relief other industries will require. We will pursue the government's existing approach to tariffs, number 8, balancing the benefits of liberalisation for consumers with appropriate exceptions to safeguard vulnerable industries and protect the prosperity and well-being of communities across every part of the UK. Number 9, I'll provide the necessary finance to support the development of customs solutions which can help deliver our cast iron guarantee that we will never put up a hard border on the island of Ireland. And number 10, following the vote for the new plan in the House of Commons, I will then allow 3 weeks for negotiations with the EU. As Prime Minister, I'll make a judgment on the 30th of September as to whether there is a realistic chance of a new deal being agreed that can pass through the House of Commons. If my judgment and the judgment of my Cabinet is that there is a deal to be done, I will seek to conclude the negotiations and pass a new meaningful vote and any necessary legislation in the House of Commons before the end of October. If my judgment is that there is no deal to be done, I will immediately cease all discussions with the European Union and focus the whole country's mission on no-deal preparations. One thing I will not negotiate on is citizens' rights. So to put the millions of EU citizens who have made the UK their home, to put them all at ease, I can reconfirm to them that their rights in the UK will be protected whatever the outcome. This 10-point plan gives us the best chance of getting a deal, but also ensures that we're prepared if we don't. If the Commission engages in good faith and negotiations are going well, then I don't believe we should ignore progress made and throw away that deal for the sake of an arbitrary deadline. With a deal done, billions more will be available to invest in the economic and social missions that I've set out, and we should welcome that. But I want to be crystal clear with members of the Conservative Party, with my parliamentary colleagues, and with the European Union. If there is no engagement on this deal, if it's apparent that the Commission is simply not interested in negotiating, if there's no willingness to tackle the shortcomings of the backstop, and if there is no immediate prospect of a deal that can get through Parliament, then there will be no kicking the can down the road, and we will intensify and finalise our preparations to leave without a deal. So from the start of my premiership, I will work on the basis that we are leaving on the 31st of October with or without a deal, unless the Commission changes its position. No deal is not my preferred destination, but if a withdrawal deal is simply not on the cards, then the only way to fulfil the democratic mandate of the referendum is to leave without a deal, which is what we'll do. Now, in any negotiation, you need leverage. And part of ours is showing that we have a plan to ensure we succeed as a country through a no-deal exit from the EU, and we're willing to use that plan if we can't get an acceptable deal. So I urge any colleagues thinking of blocking a no-deal Brexit to reflect that you may, in fact, be making it harder to get a negotiated exit by giving the EU misplaced confidence that we'll give ground and ultimately increasing the chance that we leave without a deal. But I also urge others to be clear with people about the facts. There is no implementation period without a deal. There is no recourse to GATT 24 without the agreement of the other side. You can't do a trade agreement with yourself. And the chances of no deal, far from being 1,000,000 to 1, are real, which is why we must prepare. The point about making no deal a credible threat is that you actually have to do those preparations detailed plans to help industry with any strong adjustment pressure because of the new tariffs they'd face. Detailed plans to address the additional cost and hassle of bureaucracy and export processes, in particular for smaller businesses. Detailed plans for support for the fishing and farming communities to ensure these industries, which form such an important part of our national life, remain competitive. While we are committed to open trade, we will not be naive or careless of the legitimate defence of our industries, including those which have played such a vital role in our nation's story. So we'll develop support funds to provide direct assistance to those most in need. We spent just over £1 trillion bailing out the banks after the financial crisis. So if we did it for the bankers, why wouldn't we do it for the fishermen and farmers as well? The plan I've set out today will either resolve the key issues or show how they're going to be resolved. It would include a plan to continue to work towards a zero tariff, zero quota trade agreement with the EU and find specific solutions to the challenges on the Irish border which respect the Belfast Agreement, to which we are and remain absolutely committed. It would involve one of the largest fiscal and regulatory stimuli the country has seen in decades. It would mean other tax and spending commitments will have to wait. So if you're the sheep farmer I met in Shropshire, or the fisherman I talked to in Peterhead, or the factory manager I met in Kidderminster, my message is simple. I know you face uncertainty if we have to leave the EU without a deal. I hear you, and I will mitigate the impact of no-deal Brexit on you, your families, and your businesses. You'll have to change your business model, but I'll guarantee you get the support you need to do so, and we'll ensure that no family, no community is left behind. In the end, I've always said that Britain will flourish regardless of the way we leave the EU. But we need to be realistic about the short-term impact of no deal, and I am prepared to step in and help smooth those difficulties. Without the right Prime Minister and the right plan, Brexit is just a wing and a prayer, and we can do better than that. We need a Prime Minister for all weathers, one who will work tirelessly to get a deal, but also put in the hard yards preparing for no deal. A Prime Minister willing to walk away, but a Prime Minister who will give negotiations a chance and put in place a proper strategy to ensure they succeed. Who will fight hard for the best Brexit deal, sure in the knowledge that our great country has always flourished best when trusting in the instincts of its great people. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. Now we've got the really fun bit, starting with Laura Koonsberg.
Thank you very much, Foreign Secretary. For years, the Tories have been telling the public and the opposition that you can't just splash money around and you have to be careful with taxpayers and the country's cash. Yet in this race, you and your rival are splashing around all sorts of mythical cash, even in the event of no deal. Are you willing to junk the Tories' reputation for being careful with the country's money? And secondly, you've just said you want to give negotiations a chance, but on whose planet can you get a renegotiated deal in 3 weeks?
Well, no. First of all, let me answer your question about fiscal responsibility. I am the Cabinet Minister who has been in a government that has had to make the most painful cuts in public spending across public services where I think all of us felt the pain of what was happening very personally. And you know, I have walked around hospitals in the NHS where I've known they needed more money, and I haven't been able to give it until the end when I negotiated that big extra funding increase. And the only reason that I was able to negotiate that extra money was because we took those painful decisions. We put the economy back on its feet. And so we will never throw that fiscal responsibility away because it's essential to our prosperity. But as a result of that, we have built up headroom, around £26 billion of headroom, which makes it possible to make the commitments that I'm making today whilst still sticking to our plans to reduce the deficit and reduce our national debt as a proportion of GDP. And this is a critical moment for businesses up and down the country. And it's also important that the European Union knows that we will do what it takes to make a success of a no-deal Brexit, that we won't blink as a country, that no-deal Brexit is not going to be an opportunity for them to successfully turn the screws on our country. So making these preparations is the best way of ensuring that we do actually get the deal that I think everyone would prefer.
But you've said you could do it in 3 weeks, though. Is that
Oh, sorry.
realistic?
Yes, your second question. No, I've said that I will start engaging with the European Union straight away throughout August. Then when we've published our plan for a deal that we think will get through Parliament by the end of August, we will start formal negotiations in September. But this won't be something that the European Union are seeing for the first time. But yes, there is a hard deadline in what I've said. By the end of September, I, as Prime Minister, will make a judgment as to whether there is a realistic prospect of a deal that can get through Parliament in the short term. And if my judgment is that that is not the case, talks will stop and we will put our heads down and focus on no deal. Paul Brand.
Yeah, Foreign Secretary. Hello,
Paul,
good morning. I'll stand up for the camera as well. When you were in government...
You might be standing in front of the camera.
Actually, it's... oh, sorry. I'll sit down. There's 2 cameras. It's all very complex in broadcasting. As a member of the government, for years you argued that the response to the financial crisis should be to spend less. Now you're talking about walking into a no-deal crisis and spending more. So in your efforts not to sound like continuity made, you're not worried that you look a little bit like Comrade Corbyn?
Well, I think Comrade Corbyn and his party made the financial recession infinitely worse than it need have been. It gave us the worst financial crisis since the Second World War. And without that irresponsibility by the Blair government, we wouldn't have had to have the very tough austerity years that we're just beginning to come out of. But when you face an economic shock, it is basic economics that you find support for the industries that are affected. It is temporary support, but it allows them to change their business models, to adapt. It means that they don't have to lay people off, you hope. And so it's the responsible thing to make those preparations. It's also the best way to make sure that we actually get a deal if the European Union see that we are deadly serious about leaving the EU and we're prepared to do what it takes, including very, very comprehensive no-deal preparations.
Do you accept that you're now arguing that the response to an economic shock is to spend
well,
more,
we're doing
not
one
less?
question each. My response to an economic shock is the response that chancellors from all parties have made over the years, which is to allow some loosening in the system to support businesses that are most directly affected. But what these do is allow businesses the time and the breathing space to change their business models and develop their business models so that they can survive. Steve Hawkes from The Sun.
Hi, Jeremy. Your colleague Philip Hammond has helpfully pointed out this morning that in a no deal there won't be this fiscal firepower that you're relying on because it will be needed to plug a hole in the finances. So where do you think you might be able to get this 20 billion from? And if I may, just quickly, you talked yesterday about job losses and being able to stare businesses in the eye and say, look, I'm sorry, but this is what we have to do. A university in Holland last week suggested there may be 525,000 job cuts in a no deal. Do you recognise that figure, and is that a number of jobs you're willing to sacrifice to carry through on the mandate of the 2016 referendum?
Well, first of all, we have to implement that referendum. But the job of a responsible government and a responsible Prime Minister is to do so in a way that minimises the impact on business and, in fact, maximises the opportunities for business. So I'm someone who has run their own business. I know what it's like to have to lay off someone because you haven't got enough money, and it's a horrible, horrible conversation to have. And so even one job is a job too many. But what I will do is look every business in the country in the eye and say, this government, a government led by Jeremy Hunt, is going to be there for you. We will put in place the support you need. We are going to have a period of adjustment, a period of change. Business models are going to have to change. But we will have a comprehensive package of support. And I think what Philip Hammond was talking about was that the headroom that he has built up and is jealously guarding at the moment is headroom that is there to deal for the eventuality of a no-deal Brexit. So I was very explicit yesterday that some of my other spending plans, more money for education, for example, things I passionately want to do, things that have huge support, they will take longer to be able to do in a no-deal situation because our immediate priority is going to be to support businesses that are directly affected by a dramatic change in our economic circumstances. Andy Bell.
Thanks. Andy Bell, 5 News. If you do decide that there's a deal to be done, how far beyond October the 31st are you prepared to go? Weeks or months?
Well, I don't think there is a huge difference on this between me and Boris. I mean, we both have said that we are prepared to leave by October the 31st. I have said that if we have a deal and it's going through Parliament and we need a few more extra days to get the bills through Parliament, then I'm not going to rip the whole thing up for the sake of that 31st of October deadline. But if there isn't a deal to be done, then I will leave, because in the end we have to respect the democratic mandate of the British people to leave the European Union. The difference between us is who is the most likely to avoid that horrible choice and actually negotiate a deal that can get us out of the European Union smoothly, and I believe I'm that person. Sean Connolly from PA.
Do you think you have the personality and charisma to be Prime Minister?
Well, let me repeat, as he didn't have a mic, do I have the personality and charisma to be Prime Minister? And the answer to that question, when I talk to people running their own businesses, to farmers, to shopkeepers, to people on the high street who are worried about the situation that we're in now, they don't want a showman, they don't want to be entertained, they want a Prime Minister who is going to lead us out of this crisis. Jason from the Daily Mail.
All showman then and no statesman.
Jason from the Daily Mail.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, you said no-deal Brexit would be political suicide. You're not mad enough to commit suicide, are you? I thought your pitch was you're the rational one in this debate.
I do indeed believe that I'm rational. What I said a few weeks ago, Jason, was that to go into a general election as a way of delivering a no-deal Brexit would be political suicide, because if we go back to the people before we have delivered what we promised to do last time, if we ask for another mandate before we've delivered the mandate we got the last time, which is to leave the EU, they will punish us, whoever our leader is. We'll be squeezed by the Brexit Party on the right, the Lib Dems on the left, and it'll be Labour that comes through the middle. And if Corbyn is Prime Minister, the one thing that will never happen is Brexit, because the Labour Party will never allow him. And then finally, Stephen Swinford for the Times.
What would your message be this morning to Boris Johnson? You've set out in some detail your own Brexit plans for no deal. What would you say to Boris Johnson? Do you think Amber Rudder said that there hasn't been enough detail so far? Is that your view?
What I'd say to Boris, who is a great guy and immensely talented, is that, I'm set out my plans. Why doesn't he set out his plans? And let's do it together in a TV studio and allow the Conservative Party to compare the two. Because this is actually the last week before postal ballots will arrive on people's doorsteps. And people want to have that choice. They want to see the two of us. I'm going to be doing Sky News this evening. I know Kay Burley has got space for Boris. If he'd like to come along and sit next to me, it would make it a much, much better debate. And I think that's also respectful for members. It's time for some mojo from Bojo. Thank you very much.